Welcome to Strip Cover Lit. I'm Dalton Gentry, and this is something a little different. This is something that has been requested of us many times, and we finally broke down to peer pressure and decided to give in to it. This is a bookshelf tour. So I am not, this shelf, this stack of books that I have right here comes from one of the shelves in my bedroom, but the light is terrible in there, so I've just drugged the whole stack of books out here, dust and all, and we're just going to go through them here, see what is on the shelves. I'm not sure, honestly, what's even really in here. I just grabbed the whole shelf. A few things I'm sure we've had on the channel before in the past, and a lot of weird stuff that just happened to be laying around. So, let's start from the beginning. That's usually a wonderful place to start. Very top here, covered in dust, I have a copy of The Story of Edgar Sawtell. Sawtell, I believe that's how it's pronounced. David Wroblewski. This is a New York Times bestseller and Oprah's Book Club Selection 2008, and I have no idea what it's about. This is one that I'm convinced is sitting around in every single bookstore and therefore denoted me to take it home. I will say, though, one of the top comments here at the very back is from Stephen King, and I am a Stephen King fan. I flat out loved The Story of Edward Sawtell. I close the book with the regret readers feel only after experiencing the best stories. It's over, you think, and I won't read another one this good for a long, long time. Quite the recommendation from Mr. King himself. I wish I could speak a little bit more on this particular book here, but I'm not sure. It's a bit of a mystery to me. Born mute, speaking only in sign, Edgar Sawtell leads an idyllic life with his parents on their farm in remote northern Wisconsin. We'll see. Maybe we'll get around to it one of these days. But anyway, book one of a huge stack of books, and I am just not sure if I'm going to be able to speak a lot on all of these, because there are a lot of books here. Next up, I have an advance copy of Loner by Teddy Wayne. I believe this was actually sent to me by the great Steve Donahue himself. This is a Simon & Schuster publication, and I actually reviewed this for the channel. This was one Adrian and I did not agree on. I think it's a pretty damn good book. Adrian, on the other hand, hates it with a bloody passion. So, what this is about here, let me see if I've got a brief summary. I wish I would have prepared this a little bit more in retrospect. No summary whatsoever, that's fine. Oh, there it is. David Fetterman has never felt appreciated, an academically gifted yet painfully forgettable member of his New Jersey high school class. The withdrawn and mild-mannered freshman arrives at Harvard, fully expecting to be embraced by a new tribe of high-achieving peers, but initially his social prospects seem unlikely to change, sentencing him to a lifetime of anonymity. Now, this particular book here, David falls in love with Veronica. He pursues Veronica. He's clearly a very intelligent young man. It's kind of a weird take on your classic campus romance story, if that makes sense. I believe I actually published a review of this particular piece with the Literati. I enjoy it. I think it's a damn good read. I actually think Teddy Wayne is going to be a pretty decent name once he gets a few more books slung out here. But definitely would suggest the author, would suggest the book as well if you were interested. And now for the embarrassing things. So I used to work at a bookstore. Worked at a bookstore all throughout college. And at said bookstore, we had the option once a week to take home a free paperback book. Had to be the small mass market paperback size. Had to have at least 2 copies on the shelf. But if we found something that fit that criteria, rip the cover off of it, strip the cover if you will, and you'd get this. You'd get Star Wars. This is Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, a Star Wars novel. It looks like I took this home from work in 2009. I like science fiction, I like fantasy, I like Star Wars. I'm a big Star Wars fan, but I can't say I'm a big Star Wars reader. I have read a few of the novels, not this one in particular, but they're entertaining. A bit of light reading, nothing too fancy here. But if you are a Star Wars fan, the greater canon of Star Wars literature will always impress you. Next up, a copy of Boulevard magazine. This is the copy, what issue is this? Volume 32, number 1 of Boulevard magazine, and wouldn't you know it, you open to the first page right there, short story by Joyce Carol Oates. Every now and then we will hit the Barnes & Noble, Adrian and I. This is from fall 2016, if you are curious. And every now and then we'll try to pick up a few literary magazines, trying to, support the printed word as it kind of fades off into obscurity. But literary magazines are a treasure, man. You can get poems, short stories by up-and-coming authors, well-established authors, Joyce Carol Oates, for Christ's sake, and really just see what's going on currently with the world of literature. So if you do get a chance, pick up a literary magazine. It'll treat you well. So, speaking of college, back in college, I worked at a bookstore. I was the nighttime manager at the bookstore, and I also bartended for a long time. Worked at a bar, I did private events for a few hotels. But yeah, you could hire me out and I'd sling drinks for you all night. Therefore, I have a copy of the Mr. Boston Guide. Mr. Boston is just a recipe book for a lot of different cocktails here. Gives a little bit of an in-depth of drinkware, bar basics, a handy guide. If you're going to be bartending, you should have a copy of Mr. Boston with you all times. Next up. And God, I honestly have forgotten 90% of these books even existed. Apparently, at some point in my life, I had picked up a copy of The Way of Zen by Alan W. Watts. I don't know where to start with this. I will say I flipped it open and there is an old-timey advertisement to let me know I could become a great American investor without leaving home, purchasing U.S. saving bonds. I am sure that is not still valid. Oh, you can put your social security number on it. That's safe. No idea what this is here. This seems to be a book on philosophy, philosophy of the Tao, origins of Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, the rise and development of Zen. Does seem right up my alley. Not sure why I've never picked this one over. So yeah, little Eastern philosophy. Can't go wrong. Now, if you have Star Trek, if you have Star Wars, you must also have Star Trek. Not a big Star Trek fan. I do know for some reason I picked this up at a garage sale. The small town that I'm from does a annual garage sale. It's the citywide garage sale where everybody, puts their shit out on the curb and sells it really cheap. And there's always one guy who just sells books. He has nothing but books. He's a huge reader. So I always stop by every year and just pick his collection clean. And I think I got this for like a nickel or something like that. So why not? Star Wars book. Star Trek book. Next up. Medium Raw. Anthony Bourdain. This is actually something that was sent to me by a YouTube fan, which is fantastic. I love Anthony Bourdain. He is a big contributing factor as to why I am the way that I am. I loved Kitchen Confidential. It was a huge book for me. Loved Anthony Bourdain's works, his writings, his television shows. And this is just another classic Anthony Bourdain tale. Chapter by chapter, it's just a little bit more about the underground world of cooking. Being a food critic, if you will. That's not really a good thing to call Anthony Bourdain, but being a restaurant critic and talking about the industry in just a no-holds-barred fashion. This man absolutely will... he'd go for the punches, and that's why I loved him. Pissed a lot of people off when he wrote books, and you should always piss people off. Next up, also from Steve Donahue, because apparently all the books on that shelf were Steve Donahue books, I Contain Multitudes by Ed Young. This is an advanced copy Steve sent over to me. And I believe this was an award-winning book. I want to say maybe Goodreads had it nominated Nonfiction Book of the Year. I could be very wrong about that. But I want to say that's the truth. For most of human existence, microbes were hidden, visible only through the illnesses they caused. When they finally surfaced in biological studies, they were cast as rogues. Only recently have they immigrated from the neglected fringes of biology to its center. Even today, many people think of microbes as germs to be eradicated. But those that live with us, the microbiome, are invaluable parts of our lives. So a little bit of nonfiction, a little bit of science, can't go wrong with that. I believe Steve sent me this as a bit of a sampling of a few different genres here, just kind of narrow down some things that I like. And I believe I chose that Loner by Teddy Wayne, over this. Continue knocking on the book, it'll help you. Tucker Max, I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. This is quintessential bro-lit, I believe is what it's called, frat-lit. It is absolutely awful, but you get a laugh now and then from it. I believe they made a terrible movie adaptation of this. Basically, Tucker Max was a law student. He and his buddies would get on an email chain and basically just tell stories with each other about things that they've done, terrible, terrible things that they've done. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to turn some of these stories into a book. And that's what we got out of this. Raunchy, awful Tucker Max. If you don't know, just look up Tucker Max. It will answer all the questions you have about that. Next book up here, this is actually a great selection. This is Richard Matheson's I Am Legend and Hell House. I love the short novella I Am Legend. It is absolutely wonderful, much better than the trashy Will Smith version you may have seen on the television. Richard Matheson was an absolute legend of the horror genre, and I don't think he gets a lot of the credit he deserves. Quite often when you're talking about like Stephen King, somebody along those lines, they will always reference Richard Matheson, but that's usually the only time you're going to hear that name. But if you haven't had a chance to read I Am Legend, please go pick that up. There's a great twist in that novel that you won't see coming. And if you're looking for a good horror genre, that's the one. I believe we also have a quickie review up of that particular story. And speaking of stories that we have reviews on, and books that I won't be recommending, Jack Kerouac's On the Road. This was one of my biggest disappointments ever. I wanted to love this book. I tried to love this book. This book had everything that I wanted it to have. But then when I sat down and finally read it, it's terrible. It's just rambling by Jack Kerouac. There's no focus. There's no plot. It's not enjoyable. He just didn't deliver for me. But we did publish a full review on that, so I would suggest if you want to hear a review on the Road, check those recent videos. This is, appears to be a book from college, and I know what professor assigned it, but I couldn't tell you what class it was. This is the 6th edition of Texts and Contexts. Yeah, what the hell do you say about this? Writing about literature and critical theory. Okay. So I don't know, I've kind of coined BookTube now and then as being the new literary criticism. We're not writing about literature anymore, but we are definitely talking about literature. And something that Adrian and I try to do is break down a text and analyze it. Give a bit of a literary review towards it, some literary criticism. And books like this are invaluable. They're going to help you, kind of get your bearings, try to get you on the right foot. And classes like this, if you are still in college, definitely take a literary criticism class. It will be great for you. Moving on. I have probably 500 of these because they just keep piling up. But anytime I see a book of short stories, I take home a book of short stories. This here, the Oxford Book of English Short Stories, A.S. Byatt, seems to be the compiler here. We don't believe I have an edition. You can never go wrong with books of short stories. You're always going to find some big-name authors in here. This is something that comes from the library's annual sale here in town, and I can't turn them down. There's some Thomas Hardy in there just flipping through, Charles Dickens. Oh, what else do we have here? D.H. Lawrence, H.G. Wells, Rudyard Kipling, so quite a few big names in the Oxford Book of English Short Stories. But every now and then, you don't have the time, you don't have the dedication, you just have nothing but excuses to sit down and finish a novel. But you can always make the time to sit down and finish a short story, and a lot of times you're going to be impressed by what you find. So, short story books. Good to keep around. So, I grew up playing cards. I love to play cards, I play cribbage, I play poker, I play pitch. You name it, I probably play it. It was a big thing in my family, and one game that I have never mastered, because I don't think you can master this game, and it's really hard to find people who know how to play this, who don't live at a senior citizen's home. This is the Backwash Squeeze and Other Improbable Feats, a newcomer's journey into the world of bridge, by Edward McPherson. I did read this, actually, when I was working at the bookstore. It caught my attention, and I'm like, hey, I've always wanted to learn how to play bridge. This sounds amazing. And it is an enjoyable read. This is just about a guy who decides, that there's this underground world of bridge. I'm going to crack into it. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to learn how to play bridge. And I'm going to try to play bridge competitively. Because there is a competitive underground world of bridge. They say, I believe this is the book that they mention something along the lines that there are masters of chess who won't even consider playing bridge because it's just too complex and difficult. There are so many options. Everything has to be firing on all cylinders. And you got to have a good partner as well. Somebody you can trust, somebody you can work with, and somebody you kind of know how they're going to play. So, I have yet to learn how to play bridge. I don't have enough people in my life who care to to learn how to play bridge. But maybe in about 60 years, when we're all living in the home, we'll sit down and we'll play ourselves a game of bridge. Finally, the last book from this shelf. I am a huge Rocky Horror Show fan. I have been all my life. I have performed the Rocky Horror Show. I performed as Dr. Frankenfurter back when I was not as bearded as I am now. And actually, my high school theater director got me this as a high school graduation present, and I have kept it ever since. This is Rocky Horror From Conception to Cult by Scott Michaels and David Evans. A little bit of a background story of Rocky Horror here, how it got its start, how it kind of transcended into this supreme cult classic of people who, like to perform in front of the theater screen, who throw toast at inopportune times, and really just who have a great time. You can't go wrong with Rocky Horror. If you've never seen Rocky Horror, my God, what are you doing on YouTube? You need to be watching this right now. Richard O'Brien's Rocky Horror is a classic, and it will probably give you nightmares when you imagine me dressed as Frankenfurter. But anyway, from Miss Harper, one of the people who absolutely started me on my literary career. Thank you, ma'am. I've kept it all these years. I see, even has pictures. Original pictures of the cast. It's wonderful. So anyway, this was a bookshelf tour. This was just a sampling of some of the books that I keep around the house, books that I've read, books that I haven't read, books that I forgot I even had, because they are just overflowing at this point. This was by request. A lot of people were asking us to do a shelf tour. So if you did like this kind of thing, please let us know down in the comments section down below. We greatly appreciate it. Give this video a like as well, because that's always beneficial to us. And if you want to help us create more great content like this here on Strip Cover Lit, there is a link, as always, to our Patreon, to be found in the description below.